Okay, let's get into this. I want you to, for a second, just imagine Mexico City, but not the one you see in a travel show. I want you to picture the Distrito Federal, the DF, right at the turn of the millennium. We're talking late 90s, early 2000s.
It's just a sea of humanity. I mean, you have something like 20 million people all living, working, and breathing in this one massive, sprawling metropolis. It's organized chaos, really.
Absolutely. And the city back then is in this huge period of change. It's modernizing like crazy, but, the social safety nets that are supposed to catch people, they're stretched, incredibly thin. There are cracks everywhere.
Big cracks. And it was inside those cracks that something really, really dark started to grow. We've got a whole stack of material here today. Police reports, journalistic deep dives, court records, and they all tell the story of this wave of fear.
And it wasn't a citywide panic, which is what's so interesting. It was targeted. It was a very specific and, frankly, an often invisible part of the population.
Elderly women. Specifically, elderly women who were living on their own.
Exactly. The grandmothers, the abuelitas, all of a sudden, they were being found dead in their apartments. And this wasn't, old age or sickness. This was violent.
No, this was a predator. A very calculated, very patient serial killer was actively hunting in the capital. And the media, well, they just ran with it. They gave the killer a name that became infamous. La Mataviejitas.
The little old lady killer. Which, I have to say, it sounds almost, I don't know, like a character from a Grimm's fairy tale. It sort of diminishes the horror of it.
It does sound like a caricature, but the reality was terrifying. And our mission today with this deep dive is to really get behind that name and unpack the story of the person responsible. We're going to be talking about Juana Barraza.
And this is where the story veers from, your standard true crime narrative into something that feels like fiction. If you wrote this as a movie script, I swear the studio would send it back and say it was too unbelievable.
The contradiction at the heart of it is just staggering. On the one hand, you have the killer's method, a cold, manipulative predator who gains trust by pretending to be a social worker.
Right? Quiet. Methodical.
On the other hand, by night, this exact same woman is a professional wrestler, stepping into the lucha libre ring.
It's mind-blowing. Her stage name was La Dama del Silencio.
The Lady of Silence.
You cannot make this up. A wrestler called the Lady of Silence is moonlighting as a serial killer who preys on the elderly by posing as a government aid worker. So today, that's our goal. We need to understand how did she maintain this double life? And looking through these police files, how on earth did the investigation get it so wrong for so long?
Oh, there's so much to get into. We have to talk about the victims, of course, but also the gender stereotypes that just completely derailed the police investigation. We'll get to the whole man in a dress theory later.
In the childhood, her backstory, it redefines the word tragic. It doesn't excuse what she did, not for a second, but it shines a light on where all that rage came from.
And we can't forget the painting.
The French painting, yes.
Yeah.
The boy in a red waistcoat. That is a bizarre detour that you will not believe.
It's a whole mystery in itself.
But let's start at the beginning with the crimes themselves. The foundation of this deep dive has to be understanding who exactly La Mataviejitas was hunting.
Well, to really get the scope of the crimes, you had a lot to start with the victim profile. It was incredibly consistent. Juana Barraza was targeting women exclusively age 60 and over.
But it wasn't just about age, right? It was their living situation that made them a target.
That's the crucial detail. These weren't women living in those big, multi-generational family homes you often associate with Mexican culture, with kids and grandkids running around.
No.
No. And that's, a really key sociological point. In a city as dense and crowded as Mexico City, you can be profoundly isolated. These were often widows, or women whose children had grown up and moved away, maybe to the suburbs, maybe they'd emigrated to the U.S. for work.
So they were alone.
They were living alone in these older, often rent-controlled apartments. They were part of the city's fabric, but they were invisible.
Which, from a predator's point of view, makes them low risk. There's nobody else in the house to fight back or be a witness.
Low risk, exactly. But also potentially high reward if robbery is part of the motive.
Yeah.
An older generation, they don't always trust banks. They might keep cash, jewelry, valuable religious items right there in the home.
And the sheer scale of this, I was looking at the numbers in these reports, and it's just staggering.
It's horrific. The authorities, when they finally connected all the dots, estimated that the total death toll could be anywhere from 42 to 48 victims.
48 women. That is a massive number for a single serial killer operating in one city over a few years.
It's almost unheard of. Now, to be clear, Barraza was ultimately convicted on 16 counts of murder. But the investigation, her modus operandi, it was linked to dozens more.
So how does she do it? How does a person get close enough to kill that many people without raising alarm bells everywhere? I mean, she's not breaking down doors in the middle of the night.
No, and that's what's so insidious about it. It wasn't about brute force to get in. It was all about deception. She used a disguise that was practically tailor-made to work on this specific demographic.
She posed as a government official.
A social worker, to be precise. Which is just... it's diabolically clever.
Evil, but clever.
Very. The investigators' reports detail how she'd show up at their doors, often with a clipboard and some official-looking documents. She'd tell them she was there to help them sign up for new government welfare programs, maybe a pension increase or food aid.
And I want to just pause on that for a second because you have to understand why that works so well. Imagine you are one of these women. You're 80 years old, you're living on a tiny pension, you're lonely, maybe you feel like the world has forgotten you.
Right.
And then there's a knock on the door. And it's a woman, which feels less threatening, and she's holding a badge or an ID card, and she says, I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. You're going to open that door.
100% of the time. It's an exploitation of trust and need. Barraza weaponized the social safety net. She preyed on their financial vulnerability and their loneliness. When someone in a position of authority offers help, your guard it plummets.
We're all conditioned to trust the person in the uniform, the nurse, the social worker. She twisted that instinct into a weapon.
She absolutely did. And once she was inside the apartment, the mask came off.
And the violence described in these files? It wasn't subtle.
Not at all. The cause of death was almost always bludgeoning or strangulation.
Yeah.
This was up-close, physical, hands-on violence. It was brutal.
And she often used items from inside the home.
There's another key detail. The reports mention things like telephone cords, the victim's own stockings, scarves, even a stethoscope in one case.
So she's not walking in with a murder kit. It's not like she has a bag with a hammer and a rope. She's improvising.
It implies a certain level of confidence, doesn't it? She was either improvising or she was so sure of her own physical strength that she knew she could find whatever she needed to get the job done right there at the scene.
And on the surface, at least initially, this all looked like robberies that went wrong, correct?
That was the most obvious motive. She would kill them and then rob them. She'd take small amounts of cash, maybe some jewelry, religious icons from their little altars, things she could easily carry and sell.
But if it were just about money, there are a million easier ways to be a thief. You don't usually become a serial killer just to steal a few pesos and a silver crucifix.
Exactly. Burglary doesn't escalate to serial murder on this scale unless there's a powerful psychological driver behind it. And that's where the profiling got really complex. Authorities later came to believe the motive wasn't financial at all, not really.
There's something else going on, a signature.
A deep psychological signature. The prevailing theory among profilers was that Barraza was projecting. She associated these elderly, vulnerable women with her own mother, and in her deeply twisted logic, she believed she was helping society by killing them.
Helping society? That's a terrifying rationalization. That's how a person sleeps at night after doing something so monstrous.
It points to a profound, deep-seated hatred. It wasn't about the women themselves. They were just stand-ins. They were symbols of the person she truly wanted to hurt.
Which, of course, brings us to the investigation. Because when you have a killer leaving a trail of bodies this long over several years in a major capital city, you'd assume the police would be closing in fast. But reading through this timeline, they were looking for the wrong person entirely.
This is it's a textbook example of how bias can completely blind an investigation. The initial profile was put together by Bernardo Batiz, who was the chief prosecutor for Mexico City at the time.
And he described the killer as what? Clever?
He said the killer had a brilliant mind, was clever, and careful, which, to be fair, was accurate. She evaded capture for years.
Okay, so far so good. But where did they go wrong?
They went wrong on the most fundamental question of all, the gender of the killer. The authorities, the media, the public, everyone just assumed the killer was male.
And this was because of the physical nature of the crimes. The strangulation?
Yes, entirely. The assumption was rooted in the perceived strength required. Strangling a person, a resisting adult, is not like it is in the movies. It takes incredible upper body strength, grip strength, and sustained force for several minutes.
So the thinking was, A woman couldn't do this.
That was the prevailing theory. It was seen as a crime of brute force, and therefore it had to be a man. It's a massive oversight rooted in, frankly, machismo and outdated gender stereotypes. They literally could not imagine a female perpetrator being capable of this kind of violence.
But what about witnesses? I mean, with a crime spree this long, someone must have seen something. Someone leaving an apartment building, walking down the street.
They did. They had witnesses. And this is where the story goes from a simple oversight to just a painful case of confirmation bias. Multiple witnesses reported seeing a masculine-looking woman leaving the crime scenes.
A masculine-looking woman.
Or they would describe a large woman, someone with broad shoulders, maybe wearing a red blouse, which was a recurring detail.
So, okay, the witnesses are literally telling them it was a big, strong woman, and the police heard what?
They heard it must be a man in disguise.
You have to be kidding me.
I wish I was. The official police hypothesis became that the killer might be a man dressed as a woman, or perhaps a transgender person. They were so locked into their male killer theory that they invented a scenario to make the evidence fit, instead of the other way around.
And this wasn't just a theory they kicked around the office. This had real-world consequences for people, didn't it?
Horrible consequences. This flawed theory led to what journalists at the time called ham-fisted police swoops. They started rounding up and harassing Mexico City's transvestite sex workers.
So they're out there arresting and terrifying a community that's already marginalized, all because they couldn't fathom that a biological woman might be the killer.
That's essentially what happened. They wasted an enormous amount of investigative time, manpower, and resources. They drew heavy criticism from human rights groups. They were terrorizing innocent people, while the real killer, Juana Barraza, a cisgender woman, was continuing her spree completely undetected.
It's infuriating. It's a tragedy layered on top of a tragedy. You have the victims of the killer, and then you have the victims of the deeply flawed investigation.
And the police were getting so lost, so confused, that even wilder theories started to emerge. At one point, they were floating a two killers theory, that maybe it was a team.
Okay, I could see how they might get there.
Then it gets even stranger. The police started checking the fingerprints of unidentified bodies in morgues.
Why would they be doing that?
With their suicide theory, the killings would sometimes stop for a few weeks or a month, and the police started to think that maybe Mataviejitas had committed suicide to escape being caught. They were completely at sea.
Grasping at any straw they could find.
Any straw at all. Because their primary profile, the male killer, was yielding absolutely nothing.
And then, as if it wasn't confusing enough, the red waistcoat comes into play. When I read this part of the file, I had to stop and make sure I wasn't reading a Dan Brown novel.
It's one of those details that's just stranger than fiction. It's the kind of bizarre coincidence that can send an entire investigation down a rabbit hole for months.
So, set the scene. What is this painting?
Okay, it's a piece by an 18th century French artist, Jean-Baptiste Gros. The painting is called Boy in a Red Waistcoat. It was painted sometime around 1775, maybe 1780.
A classic piece of French portraiture. What in God's name does that have to do with a serial killer in Mexico City in the early 2000s?
Well, detectives on the case started noticing something very odd. They found prints, cheap reproductions of this specific painting, hanging on the walls in the homes of at least 3 of the victims.
Three different victims in a city of 20 million people all happened to own a print of the same obscure 18th century French painting.
Exactly. And you can just imagine what that did to the investigation. They were already lost, and now this. They thought it had to be a signature, a calling card left by the killer.
Of course they did. I would too. It feels like a code. Was the killer targeting people who own this specific print? Was it a clue to their identity? Maybe they worked in an art museum or something?
It was a massive red herring. It completely distracted the detectives. They spent valuable time investigating this link, talking to art dealers, looking for patterns in the art world that just weren't there.
And in reality, what was it?
In all likelihood, it was just a bizarre statistical anomaly, a complete coincidence.
How is that possible?
Well, think about it. Maybe a popular department store, like a Woolworth's equivalent, had a sale on these prints 5 years earlier. Maybe a street vendor who was popular in those neighborhoods had a stack of them one day. Or it was the cover of a popular calendar one year.
So it meant absolutely nothing.
As far as anyone can tell, it had zero connection to the killer's identity or motive. It was just a strange, random pattern that made a messy investigation even messier.
Wow. So the police are out there chasing transvestites, analyzing 18th century French art, and checking morgues for a suicide that never happened. And all the while, Juana Barraza is living this unbelievable double life right under their noses.
And this is where we have to pivot and really look at who she was. Because her other life, her night job, is the key to understanding why the police were so wrong about the physical strength component.
She was a professional wrestler, a luchadora.
That's right. She was a fixture in the lucha libre circuit. Her ring name, as you said, was La Dama del Silencio, the Lady of Silence.
Which, knowing everything we know now, just sends a chill down your spine. The Lady of Silence.
The irony is profound. Now, for anyone who doesn't follow lucha libre, it's more than just wrestling. It's a spectacle, a form of theater. And in that theater, you have very clearly defined roles. You have the technicos.
The good guys, the heroes, they're flashy, they do high-flying moves, they play by the rules.
And then you have the rudas, the rough ones.
The villains, the heels, as we'd call them in American wrestling. They're the brawlers, the rule breakers. They're there to be booed.
And Juana always fought as a ruda. She was cast as the villain in the ring.
So just picture this for a moment. On a Friday night, she's in a wrestling ring, maybe in a sequined outfit and a mask, body slamming her opponents, playing the bad guy for a roaring crowd. And then on Tuesday morning, she's putting on a plain blouse, grabbing a fake ID card, and going out to murder a grandmother.
The duality is just, it's hard to process. In the ring, she's performing violence. It's loud, it's theatrical, it's for entertainment and applause. But in her private life, she's committing this incredibly intimate, silent, real violence.
And the wrestling explains the whole "it must be a man" theory, doesn't it?
It explains it completely. To be a professional wrestler, you have to be incredibly strong. It requires immense core strength, grip strength, leverage, and a high pain tolerance. She was a trained athlete, a combat athlete.
So the masculine strength the witnesses saw
was her strength. The broad shoulders they described were the shoulders of a wrestler who spent hours in the gym. She had literally trained her body to be a weapon. And the police, in their biased view, simply failed to consider that a woman could achieve that level of physical power.
But people aren't just born this way. They aren't born serial killers. There's almost always a story, a trauma, something that breaks a person. And Juana's backstory, I have to give a warning here, it is profoundly disturbing. It doesn't excuse a single thing she did, but it does help explain the rage.
It's one of the most harrowing backstories I've ever come across in these cases. You have to go back to her childhood. She was born in a small rural town called Epozayucan in the state of Hidalgo, north of Mexico City. Her mother's name was Justice Empirio.
And by all accounts, the mother was an alcoholic.
A severe alcoholic. And the central trauma of Juana's life, the event that seems to be the poison well from which everything else flows, happened when she was just a young girl. According to the court records and her own testimony, her mother, Justa, exchanged her for 3 beers.
I need to stop you there because we need to let that sink in. Her own mother traded her, sold her daughter to a man for 3 bottles of beer.
That is the account. She handed her child over to a man in exchange for alcohol. It's the ultimate betrayal. The one person on earth whose job it is to protect you commodifies you for a drink.
And what happened to her with that man?
The abuse was unimaginable. She was repeatedly and brutally raped while in this man's care. She actually became pregnant by him and gave birth to a son while she was still, by any definition, a child herself.
My God. It's a complete failure of family, of community, of everything.
It is. And the tragedy just kept following her. She would go on to have 4 children in total, but her eldest son, the one who was born from that horrific abuse, was later killed. He died from injuries he sustained in a street mugging.
So her entire life is just bookended by violence. A violence from her mother, sexual violence from men, the violence of the streets that takes her son.
Precisely. And if you draw a line from that past to the present of her crimes, the motive becomes terrifyingly clear. Barraza admitted in her interrogations that her motivation was a lingering resentment about how her mother had treated her.
So every time she walked into an elderly woman's apartment,
she was walking into her mother's apartment. She was killing her mother over and over and over again. These victims were surrogates for her rage. She saw these vulnerable older women, and instead of seeing a person to be cared for, she saw the person who had sold her for beer.
Which makes that helping society comment even more twisted. In her own broken mind, she might have genuinely believed she was ridding the world of bad mothers.
It's a very disturbing but psychologically coherent possibility.
Yeah.
It completely recontextualizes the crime spree. It was never just about robbery. It was about revenge.
So she's out there killing for years. The police are chasing their tails with paintings and flawed theories. How does it all finally come to an end? Because eventually the luck runs out.
It does. It all ends on January 25, 2006.
Okay, take us to that day. Where are we?
were in the Venustiano Carranza borough of Mexico City. And the final victim is an 82-year-old woman named Ana Maria de los Reyes Alfaro.
And the method of killing?
She is strangled with a stethoscope.
A stethoscope, which fits the whole medical professional social worker disguise perfectly.
It does. But this time, something went wrong for Barraza. Things didn't go as smoothly as they usually did. Barraza would later claim that she strangled Alfaro after they got into an argument.
An argument about what?
Her story was that it was a dispute over payment for house cleaning, for maid services.
Wait, maid services. So she had switched up her disguise from social worker to maid that day.
It's hard to know if that was the truth or just a story she concocted after she was caught. But whatever the reason, the result was the same. She murdered her. But this time, she didn't just melt back into the city. A neighbor saw her.
Saw her leaving the apartment.
A tenant in the building saw her fleeing the victim's home and immediately suspected something was wrong. He chased after her and managed to flag down some police who were patrolling nearby.
So she was caught, basically, red-handed.
As red-handed as it gets. The police intercepted her just down the street. And when they searched her, the evidence was damning. She was carrying the stethoscope used in the murder. She had pension forms. She had a fake social worker ID card.
The complete toolkit of her deception right there on her person.
And this is the real aha moment for the police. The moment where the stomach must have just dropped out of every detective on that case. When they finally got her back to the station and looked at her, really looked at her, they realized she was a near-perfect match, a composite sketch they'd had for years.
The one based on witness descriptions that they'd been ignoring?
The very same one. The close-cropped hair dyed blonde. The prominent facial mole, the broad, strong features. It was her. The sketch had been accurate all along. But because their minds were locked on finding a man, they'd looked right past the truth that was staring them in the face.
They had her face, they just had the wrong gender attached to it in their heads.
That's it exactly.
So she's finally in custody. The press must have gone absolutely insane. The little old lady killer is a famous wrestler. That's a headline from a fever dream.
It was a media firestorm. It was the biggest story in Mexico for months. It completely shocked the nation. But then, of course, came the legal process, starting with the interrogation.
And did she confess to everything?
It was complicated. She immediately confessed to murdering Ana Maria de los Reyes Alfaro. I mean, she was caught right there.
Mm-hmm.
And she admitted to 3 other murders.
Okay, so she gives them 4. But they suspect her of what, close to 50?
Exactly.
It.
She flatly denied any involvement in the other killings that were attributed to La Mataviejitas. She tried to draw a line in the sand. It was like she was saying, yes, I did these specific things, but I am not that monster from the newspapers.
But the physical evidence tells a different story.
The physical evidence doesn't lie. Prosecutors were able to link her fingerprints to at least 10 of the murder scenes, maybe more. The forensic evidence was overwhelming, regardless of what she was willing to admit.
So we fast forward to the verdict. This was in 2008.
Yes. The trial concluded in the spring of 2008. She was ultimately found guilty on 16 counts of murder and aggravated burglary.
16 convictions. And the sentence for that?
The judge handed down a sentence of 759 years in prison.
759 years, which is obviously a symbolic number.
It is. In the Mexican legal system, there's no death penalty, and there aren't life without parole sentences in the way the U.S. has them. The maximum effective sentence a person can serve is capped. At the time, I believe, is 60 years.
So for a woman who was in her late 40s when she was sentenced, 60 years is a life sentence.
It's a life sentence. She will die in prison. There's no question about that.
So justice is served. The case is closed. The city can breathe a sigh of relief.
Officially, yes. The authorities formally closed the Mataviejitas investigation after her conviction. But, and it's a very big but, that left over 30 unresolved cases that were initially linked to the same killer profile.
So what happens to those families? Do they just get told, well, we're pretty sure she did it, but we can't prove it, so that's that?
That's essentially what happens. It leaves this lingering cloud of ambiguity for dozens of families who may never get legal closure. And you have to remember, Barraza wasn't the only suspect ever arrested. At one point in 2005, the police arrested 2 other people, a man and a woman, and the media even identified them as the killer for a time.
So it was a messy investigation from start to finish.
A very messy conclusion to a very messy case. But there was no doubt that Barraza was the one. She fit the profile, the fingerprints, the timeline, and the sheer scale of the crimes.
So where is the Lady of Silence today?
She's serving her sentence at the Santa Martha Acatitla Women's Prison in Mexico City. And her life behind bars is, well, it's surprisingly mundane.
Mundane, after all that violence and chaos.
According to reports from inside the prison, she works as a gym instructor for the other inmates.
Well, I guess that makes sense. She's the wrestler. She knows her way around a gym.
And she also runs a small business. She sells tacos to other prisoners.
I'm sorry, she sells tacos. In prison.
She runs a small taqueria inside the prison to earn money to support her family on the outside. It's this bizarre return to domesticity. She's cooking, she's serving food. She even got married while in prison to another inmate, though they divorced a couple of years later.
It's just, it is so hard to wrap your head around that. This person who brutally murdered at least 16 elderly women with her bare hands, and now she's known for her tacos and for running a fitness class.
It brings you right back to the deep irony of her wrestling name. La Dama del Silencio, the Lady of Silence. She chose a name that evokes quiet and mystery, yet she created more noise, more panic, more media hysteria than almost any other criminal in modern Mexican history.
And that contrast between the absolute banality of her prison life, now selling tacos, and the sheer monstrosity of her crimes,
Yeah.
it's jarring.
It's a powerful reminder that monsters don't usually look like monsters. They look like people. They have jobs and hobbies and relationships, and sometimes they sell tacos.
So let's try to pull this all together. If we're looking for the key takeaways from this whole dark saga, what are they?
I think first you have to start with the sheer audacity of the deception. A professional wrestler convincingly posing as a caring social worker. It's a masterclass in manipulation and reading people's vulnerabilities.
And second, you absolutely cannot overlook the failures of the investigation. The gender bias was not just a small mistake. It was the central flaw that allowed Barraza to keep killing for years. It led to the harassment of an innocent community and let the real killer walk free.
And finally, there's that tragic, vicious cycle of violence. A story that starts with a little girl being sold for 3 beers. That trauma doesn't just disappear. It festered and it mutated, and it turned into a rage that she then unleashed upon the most vulnerable people she could find.
It's just a tragedy from every single angle, for the victims, for their families, and in a very different way, for the abused child the killer once was.
Exactly. It's a story with no light in it, really.
Before we wrap this up, I want to leave you, our listeners, with one final thing to think about. We talked about that painting, the boy in a red waistcoat.
The great red herring.
Yeah. The official line is that it was a random coincidence.
Right.
But I keep coming back to it. 3 victims in a city of millions all owned a print of the same obscure 18th century painting.
It does nag at you, doesn't it? It feels too neat to be random.
It really does. So was it truly just a statistical fluke? Or could it suggest something deeper? A pattern in the victim's socioeconomic status or their taste or even their generation that the killer was subconsciously drawn to? Maybe she saw that kind of art as a signifier of a certain type of lonely older woman.
It raises a much bigger question, which is, how many other patterns in unsolved cases have been missed because they were dismissed as mere coincidence?
And the most chilling thought of all? How many other cases are out there, right now, anywhere in the world, that remain unsolved simply because the person responsible doesn't fit the neat little profile the investigators have drawn up in their heads?
That's the thought that will keep you up at night.